Every winter, Orion rises and dominates the night sky, and I always do my best to take advantage and photograph it, because it hides some of the most spectacular deep sky objects. But there's something else Orion hides, something that has nothing to do with cameras or telescopes. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. The question is, how did people with no cameras or telescopes figure out things about the stars that we've only since confirmed in the last century? Ancient civilizations did that by telling stories about these stars. And hidden inside those stories were real, verifiable science. Not folklore, but data, the kind astronomers have since gone back and confirmed. One of these ancient stories accurately describes a star's behavior way before a scientist with a telescope got credit for discovering it. Another encoded a calendar that kept an entire civilization alive for thousands of years. And one that carried knowledge so ancient that most of it was already lost before the Greeks even started telling it. So tonight, we're going inside all three, and by the end of it, you'll never look at Orion the same way again. Now, these stories take a lot of time and effort to research and get right, but organizing this workflow has gotten a lot easier thanks to Opera, the sponsor of today's video. Opera is a free web browser, and their latest update brings Opera AI. Opera AI is a free built-in browser AI integrated directly into Opera and is more powerful, faster, and smarter. To make this video, I spent tons of time reading research papers, web pages, and articles. When I want to fact-check a claim, Opera AI can easily check the sources behind whatever page I'm reading, without having to leave the page or copy-paste individual links. And when I'm deep in research mode, one of the first things I do is set up tab islands. For this video, I had 3 going, one for each culture story about Orion. Each tab island collapses or expands to save space. It keeps my brain in one story at a time. Plus, I can name them and color them whenever I want. The sidebar is also super handy. There's a built-in player where you can choose from your favorite streaming services. Plus, the player detaches, so I can control my music even when I'm using external apps. It's those little things I love. That same sidebar also gives me one-click access to Gmail and Google Calendar without opening a single extra tab. So to access all of those features, head to the link in the video description to download Opera for free. No account needed. And now, let's dive into our first story. This is Betelgeuse, the bright red star of Orion's shoulder. Most people know it as the star that's eventually going to go supernova. But there's something else about it that's less talked about. Betelgeuse is what we call a variable star, which means its brightness isn't constant. It rises and falls on a roughly 400-day cycle. And between 1836 and 1840, an astronomer named John Herschel documented this change in Betelgeuse's brightness for the very first time. But here's the thing most people don't know. You see, there's a group of Aboriginal Australians called the Kakotha people from South Australia. They had a story about Orion that goes back an unknowable number of generations, from a culture that's been watching the sky for over 65,000 years. And when researchers analyzed this story, what they found was astonishing. So the story goes like this. There's a hunter named Niaruna, which is represented by Orion. By the way, if Orion looks upside down to you, that's because that's how he looks from the southern hemisphere. Okay, back to the story. Niaruna is absolutely obsessed with these 7 sisters over in the Pleiades. He can't stop thinking about them. But the sisters, they don't like him. They want nothing to do with him. But that doesn't stop Niaruna from pursuing them. So the oldest sister, Kambaguda, stands up to Niaruna. She's the Hyades star cluster. So Niaruna builds up his fire magic in his club, which is the star Betelgeuse, to try and overpower her. But Kambaguda fights back. She conjures up her own fire magic in her foot, which is the star Aldebaran, to ward off the attack. Niaruna's magic dies, he backs off, and he's humiliated and angry. But Niaruna doesn't stop. He waits and builds up his fire magic so he can go after them again. Now, every time Niaruna's fire returns, it comes back faster than Kambaguda's magic can regenerate. She literally cannot keep up, so she calls in for help. She calls a group of dingoes, which are these stars here, to physically hold Niaruna back while her magic recovers. They hold him off and Niaruna's fire fades again, and then it builds again, and he tries again. He's warded off by the dingoes or Kambaguda's fire magic, and his fire fades. He builds it up again, and the cycle repeats. It's a fun story, but let's look at the knowledge that's encoded in here, because that's the interesting part that I want to focus on. First, let's look at Niaruna's fire magic. When Betelgeuse is bright, his fire magic is ready. When he's repelled and humiliated, Betelgeuse dims and his magic fades. Now, Kembaguda also has fire magic in her foot, which is the star Aldebaran. Now, Aldebaran is also a variable star, but here's where it gets really interesting. The changes in Betelgeuse's brightness is dramatic and predictable, but Aldebaran barely changes at all. Its brightness shift is so subtle, it's almost impossible to detect with the naked eye. In fact, modern science didn't even know Aldebaran was a variable star until 1997. But the Kokatha people knew, thousands of years before we did. And they didn't just notice that the stars change brightness, they noticed that the stars change brightness at different rates. Betelgeuse changes faster on that 400-day cycle, where Aldebaran is inconsistent and sometimes doesn't happen for a long time. Niaruna's fire magic always comes back before Kembaguda's can, which is why she has to call in for help. Think about what that actually means. This isn't just another fun story about the stars. It's from a culture who noticed two stars with unique properties, who carefully studied them over enough generations to notice this change, long before modern science discovered it. The science is inside the drama. What we're looking at here isn't folklore that accidentally resembles science. The story was the thing that contains the information. It's like their hard drive. But the next culture took a totally different approach. They hid theirs inside numbers. Specific numbers embedded in a death story about a god. And for a long time, those numbers just looked like mythology until someone actually added them up. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. In ancient Egypt, there was the famous god Osiris. A lot of people associate Osiris with the god of death, but that's only half the story. You see, before he was the god of death, he was the god of life. That's because he taught the Egyptian people how to farm, how to irrigate, and how to build civilization. He represented order. Now, deep within the constellation Orion is the Orion Nebula, and here's a photo I took of it. It's what we call a star-forming region, and I show this because there's an interesting parallel here. The constellation that hosts this nebula, a place where new stars are created, was viewed by the ancient Egyptians as the god who gave birth to civilization. Osiris was praised by the gods for helping Egypt, but not everyone was happy. Osiris had an evil brother named Set, who was the god of chaos and destruction, and he was jealous of Osiris's success. Set was so jealous that he wanted to kill Osiris, and so that's what he did. He tricked Osiris by telling him to hop into a box, and when he did, Set sealed it shut and tossed it into the Nile River, leaving Osiris to die. More specifically, he killed Osiris on the 17th day of the month, in the season where the sun is passing through Scorpio, in the 28th year of Osiris's reign. Now, that's a lot of information that I just threw at you, but I want you to realize these aren't random numbers. They were chosen for a reason. Let's look at the number 28. The visual lunar cycle, from one full moon to the next, appears to last 28 days to your eye. In reality, it's 29 and a half days, but that distinction is very difficult to notice for an observer here on Earth. This number also relates to the most important annual event of ancient Egypt, the flooding of the Nile River, which happens once a year, making farming possible in the desert. At its annual flood peak, the Nile River reaches a maximum height of 28 cubits, the ancient Egyptian unit of measurement. So this number 28 links Osiris to the moon and the peak of the river that brought life to ancient Egypt. Now let's take a look at the number 17. The actual full moon occurs on the 15th day of the cycle, but here's the thing. The moon doesn't look like it's fading on day 15 or day 16. By day 17, though, it's obvious. The moon is visibly shrinking, like it's dying. That's the day Set kills Osiris, on the 17th day. Now let's look at the connection with the Nile River. Every year, after the flood peaks, the river starts to pull back. It starts to decline. And that happens in October, when the sun is passing through the constellation Scorpius, the same month that Set kills Osiris. So let's put this together. In the story, Osiris dies on the 17th day, the exact day the moon visibly begins to die. He dies in the month when the sun is in front of Scorpius, the exact moment the Nile begins to die. And he reigned for 28 years, the length of the lunar cycle and the height of the Nile at its peak. So this isn't just a coincidence piling on top of coincidence. It's a calendar that they built. Now, the number symbolism doesn't stop there. It goes even further than that. Check this out. So in the story, when Set kills Osiris and dumps him in the river, Osiris's wife, Isis, who happens to also be his sister, she finds this box containing Osiris, and she wants to resurrect him and bring him back to life. So she sets him and hides his body in the reeds on the side of the Nile River and goes to get help to make this resurrection possible. But the brother Set finds the body, and he wants to prevent this resurrection from happening. So he chops Osiris's body into 14 pieces and scatters them across Egypt. 14 is the number of days it takes the moon to visually go from full moon to new moon. The moon dies night by night until it disappears completely. The death of Osiris is the death of the moon, which plays out over 14 nights. Now, Osiris's wife, represented by the star Sirius, searched Egypt for the scattered pieces of her husband. She finds all but one piece. She reassembles him and begins the first ever mummification, a 70-day process to ensure he lives on in the afterlife. Just as a side note, that one piece that she couldn't find was a really important piece. And I'll give you a hint as to what it was. This piece fell into the river, and it's the reason why, when the Nile floods the land, it also fertilizes the land. Anyway, the mummification process takes 70 days. And the constellations aren't always visible year-round. Now, guess how long the constellation Orion is completely missing from the night sky every year? 70 days. During this time, it's said that Osiris is in the underworld, being mummified and preparing for everlasting life. The sky and the story are running on the same clock. After 70 days, Osiris appears in the night sky, and a few weeks later, the star Sirius, his wife, returns, and almost immediately after, the Nile River floods. These are just a few small examples of numbers contained within this story, and in reality, there's way more that would take hours to go into. But I want you to know that every number in this myth corresponds to something real and measurable. The Nile River, the moon phases, the flooding of the Nile, even the stars. And together, they form a system precise enough that Egyptian farmers knew exactly when to plant, when to harvest, and when the flood was coming, just by watching the sky and remembering a story. It was more than a myth. It was a mechanism for survival. The myth of Osiris shows that the science was built into the numbers within the story. But the next story we're going to look at is one from ancient Greece. And the reason it's so remarkable is that it reveals a deeper mystery that we have yet to unlock. For the ancient Greeks, Orion was the greatest hunter to ever live. But he was also completely full of himself. So much so that he said he would kill every animal on Earth to prove that he was greater than nature itself. The goddess of the earth heard Orion say this and sent a scorpion to punish him for his arrogance. We know it today as the constellation Scorpius. When Orion and the scorpion encountered one another, they fought until Orion was eventually killed by being stung on the foot by the scorpion. At the end of the tale, Zeus places Scorpius and Orion in the stars as a permanent reminder against excessive arrogance, and he placed them on opposite sides of the night sky so they would never meet again. Even today, you can still go outside, look up, and see Zeus's punishment play out in the night sky. Every spring, Orion sets in the west at sunset. Rising in the east to replace him is Scorpius. The hunter flees as the scorpion arrives. They never share the sky. The chase Zeus commanded is geometrically built into the positions of these constellations, and it's been playing out every single year since long before the myth was first told. When it comes to this story, most people stop there, but underneath is a deeper layer that people don't talk about. And to understand it, we have to go further back in time, further than ancient Greece. This myth of Orion didn't actually start out in ancient Greece. It was built on the shoulders of Babylonian and Sumerian myths. These cultures lived in what's now Iraq and Iran, thousands of years before the rise of the Greek Empire. In ancient Babylon, summer wasn't just hot, it was lethal. Crops died, rivers shrank, some people endured, and some people didn't. Winter wasn't the dangerous season, summer was. Orion represented man thriving in nature during the cooler months, and Scorpius rising in the spring was Earth saying man must always respect nature, and the unbearable summer heat was the reminder. By the time the story reached the Europeans who lived in cooler, rainier climates, the emotional core of the story inverted. Winter became the dangerous season and summer became the relief. The original meaning of the story evaporated and nobody noticed. But if summer ending was the most important moment of your year, you needed a way to know it was coming. You need something in the sky to tell you, like a marker. Around 3000 BC, astronomers across the ancient world were mapping where the constellations sat relative to the seasons. What they found was that Antares, the heart of Scorpius, sat at a precise coordinate, the autumnal equinox point, the exact astronomical marker for the end of summer. When the heart of the scorpion disappears from the sky, the hunter, bringing relief for the people, returns to the night. This is why I love this stuff. They didn't write any of this down. They just built a calendar into the sky and wrapped a story around it so nobody would ever forget. And the crazy part is, the sky doesn't even look like that anymore. Precession has shifted the equinox point away from Antares since then. But that's actually really useful to us, because it means we can work backwards and figure out roughly when the story was first told. But here's the thing that, honestly, I cannot stop thinking about. We found what's hidden in these 3 stories, but we only found it because we had the right keys: decades of research, ancient texts, peer-reviewed papers, and centuries of modern science. But what other secrets were lost when the tale of Orion was passed on from those older civilizations? And what about the stories we don't have keys for yet? Researcher Dwayne Homaker describes indigenous astronomical knowledge like a pyramid. The stories most of us know, that's the base of the pyramid. The researchers who dedicate entire careers to studying these traditions and stories, he places them at high school level. And at the top, the deep knowledge, the complete picture, sits with a small number of elders, knowledge that has never been shared with the outside world. Sometimes that knowledge is lost forever because the culture itself is destroyed, and sometimes when indigenous knowledge is shared, it gets taken, packaged, published, and sold, and the culture that carried it for thousands of years sees none of the benefits. So the small few who know the secrets within these stories may not want to share that information. And that means some of the knowledge that's contained within these stories, we may never get to decode. But when I look at what we've managed to find so far, variable stars hidden in drama, a flood calendar built into a myth about death and resurrection, I don't feel like we've uncovered anything. I feel like we've found a door, and we're still looking for the right keys to unlock it. Every culture that's existed looked up at these same stars, the same Betelgeuse, the same Orion's belt, the same winter sky, and every single one of them saw something worth remembering. Something worth encoding, something worth protecting. So the next time you're standing outside, looking at Orion, watching those stars flicker in the cold, just remember, you're not the first person to stand in the dark and feel like the stars are trying to tell you something. Your ancestors stood in the same dark, looked up at the same stars, and left a note. And some of those notes we're still trying to read.